So our next paper is by Charles Howley, who is a PhD student in the Iranian Studies program here at UCLA. He completed his BA at the University of Oxford, where he first gained an interest in Achaemenid Persia, writing an optional thesis on the Elephantine papyri and learning both Old Persian and Imperial Aramaic over Zoom alongside his studies. I'm always amazed by people learning things over Zoom. Charles's interests center on gender, sexuality, and religion in the Achaemenid court, links between Mesopotamian and Achaemenid religious and courtly traditions, and the religious and social roles of eunuchs in the Achaemenid courtly culture. At UCLA, he seeks to develop his knowledge of the broader pre-Islamic Iranian world and improve his knowledge of Old and Middle Persian Iranian language, along with his understanding of Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East. We're delighted to have Charles come and
I would firstly like to thank the organisers of this really wonderful conference, Professors Shayagan and Rollinger, and Marissa Stevens and Lexi Henning for the tireless work that they've done in putting all this together, and all of the speakers for your fascinating perspectives. Eunuchs, Greek eunuchoi, are a central feature in classical depictions of the Achaemenid court. They control access to the royal family and guard royal children in Herodotos, both make and plot to unseat kings in Ktesias, lead armies and poison kings in Diodoros, and have sexual relations with kings in Aelian and Curtius. However, detailed discussions of these seemingly ubiquitous figures in modern scholarship have been limited. The different terms postulated as referring to them in the various source traditions, šarri, vaçabara, ustarbaru, lipte, kuktira, and sārīs, do not always seem to match up. And the identification of many of them with the modern conception of eunuchs as male castrates is difficult to prove. Moreover, associations between eunuchs and orientalist conceptions of the harem have led most debates to revolve around their existence rather than their political and social or religious roles. However, I contend that comparison between the classical, biblical, and ancient Near Eastern sources indicates that Achaemenid eunuchs operated as a kind of ultimate other within the court. Their intersexed bodies informed a liminal gender identity, allowing them to serve the King of Kings in a variety of roles, whilst in no way threatening his hegemonically-masculine power, and in fact serving to reinforce the strict gender separation and hierarchy which characterized the Achaemenid court. Hegemonic masculinity, an important theoretical concept for the discussion of Achaemenid court eunuchs and their social identities, is Connell and Messerschmitt's hegemonic masculinity. This theory conceives of masculinity as a series of relational and hierarchical identities, with the most dominant being the hegemonic identity. As this construction is inherently unstable, the hegemonically masculine figure must constantly oppress other masculinities and femininities to assert his position. In the Achaemenid court, this identity was represented par excellence by the great king. Terms. Firstly, I contend that the following terms should generally be equated or viewed as connected with one another and associated with the role of court eunuch. Greek eunuchos, literally bedkeeper, a compound of eune, bed, and the verb echein, to hold. Old Persian vaçabara, vastrabara, literally cloth or garment bearer, which is a tatpurutsa, compound of a vest and vastra, garment, and the root bar, to carry. Elamite, lipte kuktira, from lipte, garment, and the root kuti, to bear, carry. Akkadian ustarbaru, which is a median loan word into Akkadian, from vastrabara. Akkadian rēši, literally of the head, with shar of, it's determinative, and reshu, which is head. And then Hebrew or Aramaic sārīs, which is an Akkadian loan word into Hebrew and Aramaic from rēši. Why do I think we can make these connections? There are firstly lexical connections between them. In the case of vastrabara, vaçabara, lipte, kuktira, and ustarbaru, these terms all have the same meaning, garment bearer, and have simply been transmitted differently into different languages. Lipte, kuktira, and vaçabara, vastrabara are translations of one another, with lipte appearing as a general term in the Susa Acropole texts, an archive mostly devoted to the production of textiles, whilst vastra appears in Avestan as a verbal noun from the root var, to wear. On the other hand, ustarbaru is a loan word from the Median form vaçabara, with no meaning in Babylonian. Moreover, sārīs is an Akkadian loan into Aramaic from rēši, something made clear by the Old Aramaic form sārsa, which more closely represents the spelling of the Akkadian original. In addition to this, Fraser 2022's reinterpretation of rēši and its literary equivalent mukil rēši, one who holds or keeps the head, as referring to the head of the royal bed, makes it consistent with other court terms like the mukil babi, the keeper of the gate, and the mukil apati, the keeper of the bridle, and only ever refers to inanimate objects, making it very close in meaning to Greek eunuchos as bedkeeper. In addition to this, Yersa 2011 argues that ustarbarus completely replace rēšis, or almost completely replace them, in Babylonian texts after the reign of Xerxes. The majority of functions attested for rēšis also appear for ustarbarus, with only a state landlord appearing less frequently for rēšis, explained by the Murashu archive's focus on land ownership around Nippur. There are only 8 attestations of rēšis in Babylonian sources after Xerxes, and only 1 attestation of ustarbarus before his reign, qualifying an Egyptian rēši, or Mitsraju shari ustarbaru. Moreover, these written sources also demonstrate links with visual ones. The most prominent examples of this are the famous beardless attendant figures from Persepolis, which present a link with vaçabara or vastrabara, as many of them are presented with a folded towel or garment, as you can see. Moreover, the well-attested rēši seals from the Neo-Assyrian period, there, and the important seal, Persepolis Fortification Seal 535, there, seem to associate the titles rēši and vastrabara with beardless figures. As L'Enfant argues, eunuchos was clearly used by classical authors to mean a male castrate, while rēšis and sārīsim are associated with both childlessness in both Neo-Assyrian and biblical texts. Further to this, the beardless appearance of the figures on both seals and reliefs seems to reflect some of the physical impacts of prepubertal castration for both rēšis and vaçabaras. Although it is important to emphasize that lexical similarities do not necessarily indicate the equivalence of these figures, I do think they show a close relationship between them, meriting a comparative study. I have therefore used these links as a springboard, tracing similarities in roles, associated tropes and depictions of these figures, whilst remaining aware of their different cultural contexts. Here I shall present 3 major attributes, attested for many of these figures, which I would argue reflect their role as social, political and gender others within Achaemenid and Mesopotamian court cultures. These are variation in roles, boundary crossing and social alterity. Variation in roles, as we can see here. One of the most common features of rēšis in Neo-Assyrian and Babylonian sources, eunuchoi in classical sources, and ustarbarus in Babylonian sources are the variety of roles in which they appear, showing variation in both social status and gender association. For reasons of time, I shall demonstrate this by means of 2 case studies, military roles and cosmeticians or body servants. Military roles. The most characteristically hegemonically masculine role performed by Achaemenid and ancient Near Eastern court eunuchs is that of military commander. This can clearly be seen in Diodoros, with the eunuch Bagoas the Elder taking the role of officer, or hegemon, in Artaxerxes III's Second Egyptian campaign from 340 to 339 BC. Associated with him on the expedition was Bagoas, whom the king trusted most, a man of exceptionally daring and impatient of propriety, and he had the king's Greeks and an ample force of barbarians and not a few ships. This reflects his co-control of a major contingent of Persian and mercenary troops, a full third of the frontline troops of the campaign, along with ships. He takes an active role in the campaign in Diodorus' narrative, taking possession of the fortress Pelusium and negotiating the surrender of Bubastis. Later on, after having returned to the court, he is described as a Chiliarchos, the Greek translation of the Old Persian Hazara Partish, commander of 1,000, and a major military official responsible for the safety of the great king. Moreover, Ktesias mentions that during Xerxes' Greek campaign in 480 to 479, the eunuch Matakas insulted Apollo and plundered everything at Delphi when the commander Megabyzus refused. If Matakas took over all the troops under Megabyzus' command, for this task, then this shows a eunuch gaining temporary command over the smaller part of all of Xerxes' troops for this campaign following their division at Panoplia, a very major military command. Military roles also appear in Neo-Babylonian sources at a somewhat lower rank, with shar-reshis appearing as troop commanders, shar-resh, shari, rab, umani, fortress commanders, shar-resh, shari, bel, pakiti, denati, under Nabonidus, and commanders of new troops of archers, shar-resh, shar, muhi, kashati, esheti, under Nabonidus and Cyrus, along with officers of a middle rank. Furthermore, these military roles are also seen in Neo-Assyrian sources, where shar-reshis are sometimes attested as Turtanu, the commander-in-chief, which is the most widely attested Neo-Assyrian official who commanded the armies of the West, led military campaigns in the king's absence, and represented the military aspects of royal power, very similar to the role of Chiliarch. And the Rab Shar-reshi, chief eunuch, also commanded the royal troops called the royal corps, the Kisir Shari. Cosmeticians or body servants. Another important role performed by court eunuchs is that of the cosmetician or body servant. This role features prominently in biblical sources, with the royal sārīs, Hegai, presiding over the beautification process by which the wives of King Ahasuerus are made ready for him. Let your majesty appoint officers from every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan in the women's quarters. Under the supervision of Hegai, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the women, let them be provided with their cosmetics. Later, the nature of this preparation is revealed, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. Perhaps we can see this as a reflection of a purification ritual, albeit greatly exaggerated, with links to the Barshnum purification ritual in the Vendidad, in order to make the wife worthy of the hegemonically masculine power of the king. Eunuchs also oversee the preparation of Achaemenid royal children in Plato's Alcibiades, the most highly approved eunuchs in the king's service, who are charged with the whole tendance of the newborn child, and especially the business of making him as handsome as possible by moulding his limbs into a correct shape. And while doing this, they are in high honor. This shows them physically moulding the young prince into the perfect masculine ideal of the Achaemenid inscriptions. This association can also be seen in Achaemenid visual sources. Within the palaces of Xerxes and Darius at Persepolis, various beardless attendant figures appear on door jambs, holding an alabastron in the one hand and a characteristic folded towel in the other. As this vessel type is primarily associated with the holding of aromatic oils, perhaps these individuals can be interpreted as fulfilling a similar function to Hegai and the unnamed eunuchs in Plato. I would argue that this role really reflects their liminal status, as they manage the liminal states of royal women and children, helping them to embody their prescribed social roles within Achaemenid royal ideology. Moreover, their personal interactions with important members of the court, including the future of the dynasty itself, demonstrate the degree of access available to these individuals, something also reflected in the visual sources, as the cosmetician figures are only found in the private sections of the Persepolis terrace. Moreover, these personal connections with royal women and young children give this task a feminine association in an Achaemenid context, supported by the claim in Herodotos' Persian ethnography that children live with the women until the age of 5. Thus, we can see that eunuchs perform tasks with both masculine and feminine gendered associations at the Achaemenid court, are associated with liminal spaces, and appear at various levels of the military hierarchy. Eunuchs as boundary crossers. Another way in which the liminal gender status of Achaemenid and Mesopotamian court eunuchs appears in different source traditions is through an association with boundary crossing. Crossing boundaries. An excellent example of this can be seen in Neo-Assyrian letter SAA 10-247, which states, "I have done as the king my lord wrote to me. I went through an effective purification ritual in the shar-reshi's wing, and it is now closed off." Neshe interprets this as indicating that shar-reshis had their own palace wing, separate from those of the royal men and those of the women. This is a powerful statement of the gender alterity of these figures, physically placing them outside the binary categories of male and female, and institutionalizing in stone their identity as boundary crossers. Another way in which this boundary crossing identity of eunuchs is represented in the sources is through their role as escorts. We can see this in Herodotos, where the physician Democedes is escorted by eunuchoi into the women's quarters after curing Darius I's dislocated ankle. Darius sent him to his own wives. The eunuchs who conducted him, paragnontes dehoi eunuchoi, told the women that this was the man who had given the king his life back. As l'Enfant 2021 argues, the eunuchs of this episode should be viewed as servants of the king, who are permitted to cross the boundary into the women's quarters, rather than guardians of the women. The placement of beardless attendant figures on door jambs within the palaces of Darius and Xerxes, as well as on the entrance stairways of these palaces, as you can see there, can be seen as a reflection of this boundary-crossing role in Achaemenid official art, whilst Neo-Assyrian palace reliefs depict beardless attendants escorting tribute bearers to the king, as you can see there. Enforcing boundaries. The ability to cross boundaries oneself also conveys the ability to enforce them to others, and court eunuchs are widely associated with the role of doorkeepers in our sources. Curtius and Gross's 2018 model of the Neo-Assyrian palace conceives of 3 officials overseeing the various gates of control, giving them access to various different areas of the palace, with the Rab-Ekali, palace manager, overseeing the outer gate, the Tupshar-Ekali, palace scribe, overseeing the gate of the throne room courtyard, and finally the Shah-Muhi-Betani, literally he who presides over the inner palace area, controlling the back entrance to the inner palace. Interestingly, all of these officials are attested as rēšis in Neo-Babylonian texts. The Rab-Ekali in text BM 82803 from Borsippa dating to Cambyses, the Tupshar-Ekali in texts from Sippar and Uruk dating to Nabonidus, and the Shah-Muhi-Betani from text Cyrus 312 from Babylon, dating to Cyrus. This strongly indicates that in Neo-Babylonian to early Achaemenid Babylonia at least, all of the major officials tasked with overseeing the gates of the palace were or could be court eunuchs. Biblical textual sources also support the idea of court eunuchs as doorkeepers, with the book of Esther referring to Bigtan and Teresh, sharishim of the king, who guarded the threshold. Moreover, during the pseudo-Smerdis narrative in Herodotos, the 7 met the eunuchs who carry messages to the king, who asked the 7 why they had come, when the gate guards did not, due to the 7's high social status, demonstrating how they, through their positions as gate guards, could limit access to the king, even for the aristocracy, and perhaps showing them operating according to a different social hierarchy to other members of the court. Okay, funerary cult. The boundary-crossing identity of court eunuchs can also be seen in their funerary roles. Eunuchs prominently escort royal bodies back to Persia in Ktesias, with the eunuch Petisarchus receiving the body of Astyages, Bagapartes with Cyrus's corpse, Isabartes with Cambyses, and Bagarazos with Artaxerxes I, Damaspia, and Xerxes II. Furthermore, Bagapartes is stated to have sat next to Ktesias, the grave of Darius, for 7 years after he died. This is interpreted by Henkelman 2003 as serving as a tomb keeper for Darius's tomb. This association with royal funerary cult also appears in Elamite sources, with the Persepolis fortification tablet NN 1848 stating, To Piramtaka speak, Zisawish speaks as follows, the flour that from the food supply came to the place Uzikrash, from that flour issue 3,130 quarts of the flour to the lipte kuktira, who are the keepers of the Shumar, or Shumar Nushkip, in accordance with the sealed document by Mardaspa at Persepolis, to them as rations for their servants. Henkelman interprets the term Shumar as tomb or grave mound, showing lipte kuktiras serving as tomb keepers in this text, like Bagapartes in Ktesias. He also interprets the Elamite official Bakabada, associated with the Shumar in 2 other texts, NN 2174 and Fortification 2512, and possibly the term lipte kuktira in term PF 1256, with the Ktesian Bagapartes, possibly providing a prosopagraphic link between eunuchoi and lipte kuktiras. Neo-Assyrian sources also support this connection, with contract SAA 1461 and lines 1-2 and 60 mentioning Nabu Shebezani, a Shah Reshi and overseer of the royal crypts, Shah-Muhi Bet-Sherani, and a contract SAAB 975 mentioning the Shah Reshis of the mausoleum, Bet Kimahi, who are called Nabu Gamil and Shulmushari. Waters interprets the link between court eunuchs and funerary cult in Ktesias as the ultimate expression of the eunuch's liminal in-between status, caught between this world and the next. And I contend that this model is useful more broadly. These associations can also be seen as evidence of the social alterity of these individuals, as interaction with corpses, or nazu, is a major source of ritual impurity in the Avesta. Given that these individuals were already considered imperfect in an Achaemenid context, perhaps they were considered appropriate for such spiritually dangerous tasks. Social alterity. Low social status or lack of hegemonically masculine identity. Outside of the court, castrates seem to have possessed very little social standing. This can be seen in the Hermotimus narrative in Herodotos, who, when confronting Panaeonius of Chios, the person who castrated and sold them to the Persian court, laments, "You made me no man, but a thing of naught, to maiden." Clearly, the loss of a hegemonically masculine identity here is conflated with the loss of identity in general, with Hermotimus having lost all social value. This can also be seen in Xenophon's Cyropedia, where the court eunuchs are described as objects of contempt for all mankind. This low social status also appears in Neo-Assyrian incantation text, Sagalu incantation, CT 2310-13-14, which is intended to counter the Sagalu illness, which is a kind of paraplegia disease. Spell, you flashed like the stars, be extinguished like embers. May your roots dry out, your trunk wither. Like a rēši who does not beget, may your semen dry up. This section of the incantation is meant to curse the demon causing the Sagalu illness and their progeny, thus curing the patient. And this seems to imply that the rēši's childless state is a curse. Similar attitudes appear in the later Zoroastrian tradition, with Denkard 9.21.5 referring to castrates as uncompleted demons due to their mutilated state, indicating that this status is impossible to seek a remedy for due to their lack of progeny. This low or unclean status could also result in social exclusion, with Deuteronomy 23.1 explicitly preventing those whose testes have been crushed or member cut off from being part of the congregation of the Lord. Foreign origins. Another interesting feature of court eunuchs across the various source traditions is the prevalence of foreign origins. Herodotos' Persian tribute list attests to the practice of taking eunuchs as part of the royal tribute, or bargi. Babylon and the rest of Assyria rendered to Darius 1,000 talents of silver and 500 boys to be eunuchs, paides ectomiai, perhaps indicating that, due to their long history in the area, court eunuchs were viewed as a traditional product of Assyria and Babylonia by the Achaemenids. Foreign origin is also attested in Ktesias, with the famous eunuch Artaxerxes being described as Paphlagonian. This foreign origin is also seen in the Babylonian sources, where various rēši are qualified by their ethnic origin, i.e. Egyptian, Shar-resh Mitzraju, Ashkelonite, Shar-resh Ishkilinaju, or are associated with groups of foreigners, i.e. overseer of the Elamites, Shar-resh Shamuhi Elame, possibly also indicating foreign origins. This can be seen to continue into the later Achaemenid period in Babylonia, where at least one ustarbaru, Bagazushtu, son of Mahapu, is explicitly stated as Egyptian, and various non-Babylonian and non-Iranian names, 3 Egyptian, Patina Esi, Pitbiri, and Shamu, and more commonly patronymics appear, 1 West Semitic, Shara Ili, 2 Egyptian, Mahapu and Naesi, perhaps indicating a larger number of these individuals. This seemingly large number of foreign individuals of this status can be seen to add another layer to the social alterity of these figures within the court, setting them apart from the established Babylonian aristocracy in Babylonia and the Iranian ethno-class dominant within Persis. Here is a map of the ethnic origins of eunuchoi, Shar-reshi, and ustarbaru in Babylonian and Greek sources, with eunuchs being described as originating from Ionia and Caria, Paphlagonia, the Caucasus, Hyrcania, Mesopotamia, Elam, Yehud or Ashkelon, Aram, Egypt, and Ethiopia. In the context of these high levels of foreign origin, it is interesting that many of these figures appear to have changed their names. This can be seen in the Neo-Babylonian sources in the figure Mashe-e-Munu, son of Shatuku, the Shar-resh Shari, whose other name is Idin Nabu, a classic Babylonian scribal method of indicating name changes. Moreover, the Babylonian name Shar-resh Shari Sharuduru appears with a West Semitic patronymic, Idra, and there is a high number of names created with the element Sharu, or king, perhaps a reference to their status as Shar-resh Shari. This also holds true for the later Babylonian period, with ustarbarus having Iranian names with Babylonian patronymics, Iranian names with Egyptian patronymics, Babylonian names with Egyptian patronymics, and Babylonian names with Egyptian patronymics. This was also common for shārrešis in the Neo-Assyrian court. I believe that we should view the names of eunuchs in the classical sources in the same way, all of which are Iranian in origin, with the exceptions of Hermotimos and Athos. Furthermore, despite the evidence of foreign origins, in visual sources they appear completely Iranian. All of the beardless attendant figures from Persepolis are dressed either in the court robe, kipasis, as we can see there, or the Median riding dress, sarapis, as we see there, even wearing the akinakes, an Iranian short sword, much like the king and other courtiers. Moreover, the seated figure in Persepolis Fortification Seal 535, there, she appears to be wearing a kandis, an Iranian sleeved cloak, and holding a lotus flower, both common features of Iranian elites in Achaemenid art, standing in great contrast to the ethnographic depictions of subject peoples in Achaemenid reliefs. This can also be seen for the beardless attendants in Neo-Assyrian reliefs, who can be seen to wear garments almost identical to that of the monarch, with tasseled fringes at the hems, bracelets, daggers, and earrings. And there is the ethnographic depictions of subject peoples. Whilst others, Nashe and Reed, have suggested that this indicates a hegemonically masculine identity for eunuchs, I would argue that they were only representatives of the power of the king, reflecting his hegemonically masculine power, whilst being totally excluded from it themselves due to their effeminate physical features. This would then fit with the roles of Turtanu or Hazara Partish as representatives of the king on the battlefield, and explain the significance of the eunuch Artaxerxes' attempts to acquire a fake beard in Ktesias, as he sought to overcome his own liminal gender status and usurp the king's hegemonically masculine identity. Conclusions. In conclusion, I believe that we should see Achaemenid court eunuchs as the ultimate internal other within the court, supported by, loyal to, and to some degree imbued with the hegemonically masculine power of the great king. They nevertheless were unable to take part in it due to their beardlessness and lack of procreative activity. The resultingly liminal gender identity made these figures incredibly useful within the court, as they could serve the king in any task, regardless of gendered associations or social status, and due to their non-hegemonic identity, could not threaten the power of the king. Moreover, as figures with a liminal identity, they were uniquely able to cross the various social boundaries of the court and enforce those boundaries towards others. This liminal identity and association with boundary crossing also made them perfect figures to participate in the royal funerary cult. Thank you for listening.